My name is Victoria, and I'm 28 years old. I was lying on the ground, unable to move my legs, while my father screamed at me to stop being dramatic at my brother Jake's 30th birthday party. The crack everyone heard when I hit the pool's edge meant nothing to them. My mother accused me of ruining everything while Jake stood there smirking. But when paramedic Jennifer saw I couldn't move, she immediately called for police backup. Before I share what the MRI revealed and how my family's dark secret unraveled, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, because this story might just help you recognize the signs I missed for years. Growing up in suburban Dallas, I learned early that there were two different sets of rules in our house. One for me and one for my older brother Jake. My father Marcus built his real estate empire from nothing, or so he liked to tell everyone at country club dinners. He'd been a college football star before a knee injury ended his dreams, and he never let anyone forget it. My mother Diana had been Miss Texas runner-up in her day, and she carried herself like she'd won the crown. Together they created what looked like the perfect American family. Jake was their golden child from day one. 2 years older than me, he had Dad's athletic build and Mom's charisma. He could do no wrong in their eyes. When he made the high school football team, Dad threw a party for the whole neighborhood. When I graduated valedictorian, they complained about having to sit through a long ceremony. That was just how things worked in our family. The first time Jake really hurt me, I was 8 years old. We were playing upstairs while Mom hosted her book club below. Jake said he wanted to show me a trick at the top of the stairs. Before I knew what was happening, he shoved me hard. I tumbled down 14 steps, landing in a heap at the bottom. When Mom's friends rushed over, Jake was already crying, saying I'd tripped while chasing him. I tried to tell them he pushed me, but Mom just smoothed my hair and said I needed to be more careful. Dad came home that night and lectured me about not disrupting Mom's social events with my clumsiness. My wrist was sprained, and I had bruises covering my entire left side, but the doctor accepted my parents' explanation without question. After all, the Andersons were pillars of the community. Who would suspect anything else? By the time I turned 12, Jake's pranks had evolved into something darker. During a particularly violent thunderstorm, he lured me into the basement under the pretense of showing me his new video game setup. The moment I stepped inside, he slammed the door and locked it from the outside. The basement had no windows, and only one small light bulb that Jake knew had been flickering for weeks. When it finally went out, I was trapped in complete darkness with the storm raging above. I screamed and pounded on the door for 3 hours. When my parents finally came home from their dinner party, Jake told them I'd locked myself in by accident while playing hide and seek. They found me curled in a corner, sobbing hysterically. Dad's response was that I needed to toughen up. Mom said I was being dramatic and attention-seeking. Jake got a new gaming system that weekend as an early birthday present. The pattern continued through high school. When I was 16 and working on my college application essays, I'd spent months perfecting them. The deadline was in 2 days, when Jake somehow deleted everything from my laptop. Not just the essays, but all my backup files too. He claimed it was a virus, but I saw him smirking when I cried. My parents' solution was to hire someone to help Jake with his applications, while telling me I should have printed hard copies. I had to rewrite everything from memory in 48 hours. I still got into my first choice nursing program, but my parents didn't even attend my acceptance celebration. They were too busy celebrating Jake getting into state school for business, even though his grades were mediocre at best. After college, I thought distance would help. I became a pediatric nurse at Children's Medical Center, one of the best hospitals in Dallas. I loved my work, felt proud of helping sick kids and supporting terrified parents. But to my family, I was wasting my potential. Dad would introduce Jake as his future business partner and me as his daughter, who worked at some hospital. The distinction wasn't lost on anyone. Jake joined Dad's real estate company straight out of college, despite having failed half his business classes. Dad created a vice president position just for him. Within 2 years, Jake had made 3 deals that lost the company significant money, but somehow he kept getting promoted. That's when I started noticing discrepancies. I'd helped with the company's books during summer breaks in college, so I knew how the systems worked. When Jake started flashing expensive watches and talking about investment properties, even Dad didn't know about my instincts kicked in. During a family dinner where I was helping Mom in her home office, I noticed some financial documents on her desk. The numbers didn't add up. Money was moving through shell companies, and Jake's signature was on everything. I took photos of the documents thinking I was protecting my parents from their son's theft. When I tried to show Dad the evidence, he accused me of being jealous of Jake's success. Mom said I was trying to tear the family apart. Jake must have realized I knew something because his attitude toward me shifted from dismissive to actively hostile. That brings us to 3 weeks ago, the morning of Jake's 30th birthday party. Mom had been planning it for months, inviting everyone who was anyone in Dallas society. She called me repeatedly, guilt-tripping me about being part of the family celebration. Despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I went. I even brought a peace offering, a photo album I'd spent weeks creating filled with pictures from our childhood. Maybe I was naive, but I thought if Jake saw those early photos before everything went wrong, he might remember when we actually cared about each other. The morning of Jake's party, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. My apartment in uptown Dallas felt like the only safe space I had, and leaving it to face my family always required mental preparation. I dressed carefully, choosing a modest sundress Mom couldn't criticize, and pulling my hair back the way she preferred. The photo album I'd made for Jake sat on my kitchen counter wrapped in silver paper. I'd spent 3 weeks scanning old photos, arranging them chronologically, adding little notes about shared memories that weren't tainted by what came after. I arrived at my parents' house in Highland Park at noon, 3 hours before the party officially started. Mom insisted family should be there early to help set up, though we all knew she'd hired a full team of professionals to handle everything. The house looked like something from a magazine spread. White and gold balloons clustered in elegant arrangements, a professional bar setup on the patio tables dressed in crisp linens surrounding the pool. Mom had outdone herself. She greeted me at the door with her typical assessment eyes scanning me from head to toe. She found something to criticize anyway, mentioning that I looked tired and suggesting I should consider getting some work done around my eyes. I was 28, but in her world that was practically middle-aged for a woman. I bit my tongue and asked how I could help. Jake arrived an hour later with his wife, Sarah. They'd been married for 2 years, and I'd watched Sarah transform from a vibrant, confident woman into someone who jumped at shadows. She rarely spoke at family gatherings anymore, always looking to Jake before answering even simple questions. When she saw me, something flickered in her eyes. Relief maybe, or recognition. One damaged woman seeing another. While Mom directed the catering staff with military precision, Jake approached me by the pool. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He thanked me for coming, his voice loud enough for our parents to hear. Then, leaning closer, he whispered that he knew about my snooping. My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't the place for confrontation. As guests began arriving, I fell into my assigned role. The helpful daughter refilling drinks, chatting with Dad's business associates, making sure elderly relatives had seats in the shade. I overheard Jake holding court near the bar, regaling his fraternity brothers with stories about his latest business triumphs. When someone asked about me, he laughed and said I was the family bleeding heart, wasting my education, wiping sick kids' noses. Dr. Coleman and his wife arrived around 4. He'd been our family physician when Jake and I were young, though he'd since moved into hospital administration. He found me arranging appetizers and pulled me aside, mentioning he'd heard wonderful things about my work at Children's Medical Center. Apparently, I'd helped save one of his colleagues' grandchildren during a particularly difficult case. It was the first genuine compliment I'd received all day. The party was in full swing when Jake found me again. This time his friendliness seemed almost genuine. He asked if I could come upstairs for a minute, saying he wanted to show me something before he opened presents. He mentioned renovations to the master suite that overlooked the pool, saying Sarah had done an amazing job with the design. I should have paid attention to how Sarah's face went pale when she heard him invite me upstairs. I should have noticed how she started to say something then stopped when Jake shot her a look. But I was tired of fighting. Tired of being the difficult one. Maybe if I played along, we could get through one family event without drama. So I followed him up the curved staircase past family photos, where Jake's accomplishments were prominently displayed while I appeared only in group shots. The second floor was quieter, the party noise muffled below. Jake led me through his childhood bedroom, now converted into a home gym, toward the French doors opening onto a balcony. The view was admittedly spectacular, overlooking the pool where guests mingled with drinks in hand. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light. For a moment, I let myself relax. Then Jake's demeanor changed completely. His fake smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. He started talking about how I'd always tried to make him look bad, always acted superior with my grades, and my holier-than-thou attitude. I tried to interrupt to deny it, but he kept going. He knew about the photos I'd taken of the financial documents. He knew I'd tried to show Dad. He said I was trying to destroy everything he'd built. I told him he was stealing from our parents, that eventually they'd figure it out with or without my help. That's when he laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. He said Dad knew exactly what was happening because he was getting his cut. The only problem was me and my self-righteous need to play hero. He moved closer, backing me against the balcony railing. I could hear the party below, people laughing, music playing. Mom's voice carried up, directing someone to bring out the birthday cake soon. Jake leaned in, his breath hot on my face, and said things would be so much easier if I just disappeared. Before I could process the threat, before I could scream, he grabbed my shoulders. To anyone watching from below, it might have looked playful. A brother giving his sister a friendly shake or hug. But I saw his eyes dead and determined as he said those words that still haunt me. "Cool off, sis." Then he shoved me hard over the railing. The fall happened in slow motion and all at once. For a split second, I was weightless, suspended in air, my mind struggling to process that Jake had actually pushed me. Then gravity took over. 2 stories isn't necessarily fatal, but the angle was all wrong. I was heading straight for the shallow end of the pool where decorative rocks lined the edge. I tried to twist my body, some primitive instinct attempting to protect my head and spine. My hands reached out desperately for anything to slow the descent. My fingertips grazed the pool umbrella but couldn't grip. The last thing I saw before impact was the horrified face of Dr. Coleman's wife looking up from her conversation. The sound my body made hitting the pool edge was something between a crack and a crunch. I hit the decorative rocks first, my lower back taking the full force before sliding into 3 feet of water. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, like lightning shooting through my spine. Then suddenly nothing. No pain below my waist. Nothing at all. I was conscious but couldn't move my legs. The water was turning red around me and I could hear screaming, though it sounded far away. My face was barely above water and I concentrated everything on keeping my head up, not drowning in 3 feet of chlorinated water while 50 people watched. The first person to reach me was one of the catering staff, a young woman who immediately supported my head while shouting for help. Dr. Coleman appeared next, his professional instincts overriding party etiquette. He ordered everyone to stay back, not to move me, his voice carrying an authority that even penetrated my shock. I remember him checking my pulse, asking if I could feel my legs. When I whispered no, his expression told me everything. Then my father's voice boomed across the patio. "Get up, Victoria. Stop making a scene. Walk it off, and stop being such a baby." Even through my haze of shock and pain, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was paralyzed in a pool turning pink with my blood, and he was worried about the scene I was making. Jake had already made it downstairs, playing the concerned brother to perfection. He pushed through the crowd, claiming I'd been drinking, that I'd always been clumsy. She practically jumped, he told anyone who would listen. You know how she gets, always needing attention. My mother appeared, designer heels clicking on the pool deck, more concerned about guests seeing this drama than her daughter's broken body. "Victoria, you're ruining your brother's birthday," she hissed low enough that only those closest could hear. "All these important people are here. Can't you just once not make everything about you? She actually tried to shoo guests back toward the house, insisting everything was fine. Just a little accident. Please enjoy the party. 20 minutes passed before anyone called for help. 20 agonizing minutes where I lay in that pool, unable to feel half my body, while my parents tried to manage the situation like a PR crisis. Coleman finally defied my father's direct orders and had his wife call 911. I heard Dad threatening to ruin Coleman's career, Mom insisting I just needed to rest inside. Some guests were horrified, others confused. A few of Dad's business associates were already making excuses to leave, not wanting to be associated with whatever this was. Jake kept his story straight, describing my jump in detail to anyone who'd listen, even demonstrating how I'd supposedly climbed the railing myself. Only Sarah stood silent in the corner, her face white as paper, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. When we finally heard sirens approaching, Mom actually asked if I could move myself before they arrived to avoid embarrassment. The catering woman holding my head looked at her in disbelief. "Your daughter might be paralyzed," she said, her accent thick with emotion. "What is wrong with you people?" My father responded by firing the entire catering company on the spot, as if that would somehow restore order to his perfectly controlled world. Jake was already on his phone with someone, probably a lawyer, pacing by the garden as he talked. Only Dr. Coleman stayed focused on me, monitoring my vital signs, keeping my spine as stable as possible, whispering that help was coming. The paramedics arrived like angels of mercy. The lead paramedic, a woman named Jennifer with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at the scene and immediately took charge. She knelt beside me in the water, introducing herself calmly while assessing my condition. Her partner, a younger man named David, began setting up equipment. Jennifer asked me directly what happened. Before I could answer, Jake interrupted, launching into his rehearsed story about my drinking and jumping. Jennifer held up her hand to silence him, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm asking her," she said firmly. "Can you tell me what happened, honey? I wanted to tell the truth." The words were right there, fighting to come out. But my father loomed over us, his shadow falling across the pool, and years of conditioning kicked in. "I fell," I whispered. That's all I managed before Jake jumped in again with embellishments. Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. She asked specific questions about the angle of the fall, whether I'd been pushed or jumped, if I'd been drinking. Her tone was professional but skeptical. When she examined my injuries, carefully checking my spine, she exchanged a meaningful look with her partner. The angle of impact, the specific location of the trauma, none of it matched someone who'd jumped voluntarily. While David prepared the backboard, Jennifer made a quiet call on her radio. I heard her request police backup for a potential crime scene. My father exploded, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. Jennifer stood up, all 5 feet 4 inches of her facing down my 6'2" father, without flinching. "Sir," she said, "your daughter has sustained serious trauma consistent with being pushed from height. Protocol requires us to notify law enforcement. I suggest you step back and let us do our job, unless you'd like to be charged with interfering with emergency services." The silence that followed was deafening. 50 of Dallas's elite stood, frozen champagne glasses still in hand, watching our family's perfect facade crack apart. Mom started crying, but they weren't tears of concern for me. She was mourning her ruined party, her damaged reputation. Jake had gone very quiet, his face pale despite his tan. Sarah suddenly stepped forward. "She needs help," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Please, just help her." She looked directly at Jake when she said it, something passing between them that I couldn't interpret. As Jennifer and David carefully secured me to the backboard, I heard the distinctive sound of police sirens approaching. 2 officers arrived just as they were lifting me from the pool. The next phase of this nightmare was about to begin. The police officers who arrived were a study in contrasts. Officer Martinez was older, probably mid-40s, with gray threading through his black hair and eyes that missed nothing. His partner, Officer Thompson, looked fresh from the academy, eager but uncertain in this upscale neighborhood, full of people who probably golfed with his chief. Martinez took one look at the scene and began issuing quiet orders. Thompson started photographing everything: the balcony, the pool, the distance between them, the blood still visible in the water. Martinez approached Jennifer as she supervised loading me into the ambulance. They spoke in low voices, but I caught fragments. Trajectory, inconsistent with voluntary jump. Defensive wounds on her hands. The family's behavior is concerning. Jennifer handed him her preliminary notes, and Martinez's expression darkened as he read. My father tried to intervene, pulling out his phone to call the police chief directly. "Bob," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "there's been a misunderstanding at my house. Your officers are harassing my guests over a simple accident." But Martinez wasn't intimidated. He politely but firmly informed my father that this was now an active investigation. Jake had recovered his composure enough to approach Officer Thompson, turning on his charm. He offered his version of events, painting me as unstable, jealous, attention-seeking. He even suggested I might have jumped deliberately to ruin his party, knowing how that sounded to anyone with half a brain. Thompson dutifully took notes, but I saw him glance at the height of the balcony with skepticism. Mom attempted damage control with the guests, but the damage was done. People were leaving in droves, whispering among themselves. Some looked genuinely concerned, others merely scandalized. Dr. Coleman refused to leave, insisting on accompanying me to the hospital despite my father's threats. Sarah did something unexpected then. She approached Officer Martinez privately, away from Jake's watchful eyes. They talked for several minutes, Sarah gesturing urgently, Martinez nodding and taking notes. Jake noticed and started toward them, but Thompson intercepted him with more questions. As the paramedics prepared to transport me, Jennifer leaned close. "We're taking you to Presbyterian," she said. "They have the best spinal unit in the state. Don't worry about your family. You just focus on staying strong." Something in her tone suggested she knew exactly what my family was. The ride to the hospital was a blur of medical jargon and careful monitoring. Jennifer stayed with me, holding my hand when the pain in my upper back became overwhelming. She kept asking me questions, keeping me conscious and engaged. Not about the fall, but about my job, my patients, anything to keep me focused on something other than the fact that I couldn't feel my legs. At the emergency room, I was immediately surrounded by medical professionals. The trauma team was led by Dr. Patricia Chen, who I recognized from medical conferences. She was brilliant, no nonsense, and took one look at my injuries before ordering an immediate MRI and CT scan. The tests confirmed what Dr. Coleman had feared. I had fractured my L2 and L3 vertebrae with severe compression of the spinal cord. The swelling was significant, and without immediate intervention, the damage could become permanent. Dr. Chen explained that I needed emergency surgery to stabilize the fractures and decompress the spinal cord. She was honest about my chances. With surgery, I had a 50-50 chance of regaining function in my legs. Without it, paralysis was certain. The choice should have been obvious, but my parents, who had finally arrived at the hospital, started arguing about second opinions and insurance coverage. Dr. Chen's patience evaporated. With respect, she said, "Cutting through their objections, your daughter is 28 years old and fully capable of making her own medical decisions." Victoria: "Do you consent to surgery?" "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I'd felt in years. My mother actually gasped, as if my making a decision without their input was more shocking than my broken spine. Before they wheeled me into surgery, Detective Martinez arrived. He'd been promoted from officer sometime during the transport, the case already escalating beyond a simple accident investigation. He asked if I felt able to make a brief statement. My parents immediately objected, Dad's lawyer having arrived in expensive suits and aggressive attitudes. But I was done being silenced. With Detective Martinez recording and a nurse as witness, I said simply, "My brother pushed me. He threatened me first, then pushed me off that balcony. I have evidence of why he wanted me gone, financial documents on my phone proving he's been embezzling from my father's company." The room exploded. Dad shouting about lies and defamation, Mom wailing about family betrayal, the lawyer threatening lawsuits. But Martinez just calmly collected my phone, promising to keep it safe as evidence. As they prepared to wheel me to surgery, he leaned close and said, We're going to get to the truth, Miss Anderson. You have my word. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took hold was Sarah standing in the doorway. She was crying but nodding as if making a decision. Later I would learn that those 8 hours I spent in surgery were when everything truly began to unravel. 8 hours. That's how long I was under while Dr. Chen and her team worked to put my spine back together. They inserted titanium rods and screws, decompressed nerves, removed bone fragments that threatened to cause permanent damage. My coworkers later told me it was one of the most complex spinal surgeries the hospital had performed that year. While I was unconscious, fighting for my ability to walk, my family's empire began its collapse. Detective Martinez had taken my phone to the forensics team, and what they found was damning. Not just evidence of Jake's embezzlement, but a complex web of fraud involving my father's company. Shell corporations, money laundering, tax evasion spanning 5 years. Jake hadn't just been stealing. He'd been covering up larger crimes. Sarah became the catalyst for everything that followed. While I was in surgery, she walked into the police station with a flash drive and a story that made even veteran detectives sick. She'd been documenting Jake's abuse for 2 years. Videos of him threatening her, photos of bruises he'd inflicted, recordings of him bragging about what he'd done to me over the years. The morning after my birthday, she started reading from a prepared statement he showed me a video on his phone. He'd recorded pushing Victoria. He was laughing about it, saying no one would ever believe her over him. He's done this before. His ex-girlfriend Melissa, she fell downstairs at his apartment in college. Another girl, Amy, she accidentally drove her car into a tree after breaking up with him. It's always accidents with Jake. Sarah provided names, dates, police reports that had been buried or dismissed. Jake's pattern went back to high school. Girls who rejected him had accidents. Business partners who questioned him had misfortunes. And always, my parents' money and influence made problems disappear. I woke up in the ICU to find my room full of flowers, but none from family. My nursing colleagues had practically set up camp in the waiting room. My supervisor, Linda, was the first face I saw clearly. She held my hand while Dr. Chen explained the surgery's success. The immediate danger had passed, but recovery would be long and uncertain. I had sensation in my legs, pins and needles that hurt like hell, but meant hope. Detective Martinez visited on day 3. By then I could wiggle my toes, a miracle that had my physical therapist crying happy tears. Martinez brought difficult news. Jake had been arrested for attempted murder. The video Sarah mentioned had been recovered from his phone, deleted but not destroyed. It showed everything, including his words before pushing me. But that wasn't all. The FBI had taken over the financial investigation. My father was under federal indictment for fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The company was being seized, assets frozen. My mother, while not charged criminally, was named in multiple civil suits. In 3 days, the Anderson dynasty had crumbled. Mom came to see me once alone, dressed in black like she was already in mourning. She didn't ask how I was. Instead, she ranted about how I'd destroyed everything, how I should have just kept quiet like a good daughter. When she said I was no longer welcome in the family, I laughed. It hurt my incisions, but I couldn't help it. She left in tears, but they weren't for me. My father never came. His lawyer sent a letter officially disowning me, as if that carried legal weight. Jake tried to visit, but hospital security, warned by Detective Martinez, turned him away. He was out on bail wearing an ankle monitor, still maintaining his innocence despite video evidence. The real support came from unexpected places. Dr. Coleman visited daily, bringing his wife, who turned out to be a retired physical therapist. She worked with me off the clock, pushing me harder than my official PT dared. Jake's ex-girlfriends reached out through social media, sharing their stories, offering support. Melissa, the one who fell downstairs, had spent years in therapy dealing with trauma. Amy still had panic attacks when she saw cars that looked like Jake's. Sarah visited on week 2 after Jake had been formally charged. She looked different, lighter somehow, despite the circumstances. She filed for divorce the day after he was arrested. She'd also agreed to testify in exchange for immunity from any financial charges, though she swore she never knew about the money until recently. I found the video on his phone by accident, she told me. I was looking for photos for your birthday album, the one you made him. I wanted to do something similar. Instead, I found videos of him hurting people. Not just you. There were others. Some I don't even recognize. The FBI found those videos too. Jake had kept trophies of his violence dating back years. The investigation expanded beyond financial crimes to potential serial assault charges. 3 more women came forward after news coverage started. My brother wasn't just a thief and attempted murderer. He was a predator who'd been protected by privilege his entire life. Physical therapy was torture and salvation combined. Every day I fought to move a little more to regain strength and control. The nerve pain was excruciating, like electrical storms firing through my legs. But each small victory, standing for 5 seconds, taking a single step between parallel bars, felt monumental. My coworkers arranged a rotation to ensure I was never alone. They brought home cooked meals, helped with insurance paperwork, kept me updated on hospital gossip. The children's ward sent handmade cards from patients I'd cared for. One little girl with leukemia drew me as a superhero with a fixed spine made of stars. I kept that picture taped where I could see it during the hardest moments. After a month, I could walk with a walker for short distances. The prosecutors came to take my full deposition hours of testimony about years of abuse. I told them everything from that first push down the stairs to the final moment on the balcony. They had me identify evidence photos of old injuries I'd hidden, medical records showing patterns of trauma. The trial date was set for 6 months out. Jake's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, but the DA, facing public pressure and media attention, refused anything less than 15 years. The federal charges against my father carried even more time. The empire they'd built on crime and cruelty was becoming their tomb. 3 months into recovery, I achieved what doctors called miraculous progress. I walked unassisted across my hospital room. It was only 10 steps, and I needed to rest afterward, but I did it on my own legs with my own strength. Linda captured it on video, and within hours the entire hospital seemed to know. Even doctors I'd never met stopped by to congratulate me. That same week, Jake's trial began. I testified via video link, still too vulnerable to face him in court. I watched him watch me tell the truth he'd spent years suppressing. His mask never slipped, that practiced charm still radiating even in an orange jumpsuit. But the jury saw through it. They saw the videos, heard Sarah's testimony, listened to his ex-girlfriends describe their terror. The verdict came back in under 2 hours. Guilty of attempted murder, guilty of assault, guilty of witness intimidation. The financial trial was still pending, but for the violence alone he received 25 years without parole. When the judge read the sentence, Jake finally broke, screaming that I'd ruined his life, that I was nothing, that our parents should have gotten rid of me years ago. Dad's trial was quieter but equally damning. The forensic accountants had unraveled everything. He'd built his empire on fraud from the beginning, using Jake as a shield in recent years. The jury found him guilty on all counts. 12 years federal time, no minimum security country club prison. Real prison with real consequences. Mom escaped criminal prosecution but lost everything else. The house, the cars, the jewelry, the social standing she'd valued above her daughter's safety. She moved in with her sister in Houston, telling anyone who'd listen that she was the real victim in all this. I heard she started drinking heavily, the perfect image finally cracked beyond repair. 6 months after that terrible birthday party, I stood at the starting line of a 5K race benefiting spinal cord injury research. My legs shook, not from nerve damage, but from anticipation. I'd trained for 3 months to reach this point each day, pushing a little harder, walking a little farther. The doctors called my recovery remarkable, but I knew it was pure stubbornness that got me here. Sarah stood beside me at the race wearing a team shirt with my name on it. We'd become unexpected friends through this journey, 2 women who'd survived the Anderson men and lived to tell about it. She'd started therapy, was working on her own recovery from years of abuse. She'd also started dating again, a kind pediatrician from my hospital who treated her like she deserved. The race wasn't about winning or even running the whole way. I walked most of it, jogged small sections when my body allowed. Every step was a victory over Jake's attempt to take my mobility, over my parents' attempts to silence me, over years of being told I was worth less than my brother. When I crossed that finish line, my entire nursing unit was there cheering. I collapsed into their arms, sobbing with joy and exhaustion. The victim impact statement I'd written for Jake's sentencing haunted me for weeks afterward. Not because of what I'd said, but because of what I'd finally understood while writing it. The pushing me off the balcony wasn't the worst thing Jake did. It was just the first time he'd miscalculated. The real crime was the years of systematic abuse enabled by parents who valued appearance over truth, power over justice, their son over their daughter. I returned to work 8 months after the fall, starting part-time in the pediatric trauma unit. My supervisor thought I might struggle with trauma cases, but the opposite proved true. I could spot the signs others missed: the children who flinched wrong, the parents whose stories didn't match the injuries, the siblings who protected each other with fierce desperation. I became known as the nurse who listened, who believed, who acted. One case particularly stays with me. A 7-year-old boy came in with a broken arm, his older brother insisting he'd fallen from his bike. But I recognized the protective stance, the rehearsed story, the way the older brother positioned himself between the younger and their father. I alerted social services, pushed for investigation, despite the family's prominent status. It turned out the father had been abusing both boys for years. They were removed from the home, placed with a loving aunt. The older brother hugged me when they left, whispering thank you for believing us. My physical recovery continued, progressing beyond all expectations. A year after the fall, I completed my first 10K race. 18 months later, a half marathon. Each milestone felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that my family had tried to destroy. The chronic pain never fully disappeared. Some days were harder than others, but I learned to work with my body instead of against it. I started speaking at conferences about recognizing and responding to family violence. My story had become public during the trials, and organizations reached out wanting me to share my experience. At first, I declined, too raw and private, but eventually I realized my story could help others trapped in similar situations. The first speech I gave was to a room of emergency medicine professionals. I talked about the signs everyone missed, the way privilege and reputation can mask abuse, the importance of listening to victims even when their families are powerful. I showed them my medical records, the pattern of injuries over 20 years that no one had connected. The room was silent when I finished, then erupted in applause. Later, several doctors approached me privately, sharing their own missed cases, promising to look closer in the future. I moved to Colorado 2 years after the fall, needing true distance from Dallas and its memories. Denver offered mountain air, new beginnings, and a position at Children's Hospital Colorado, where my reputation was based solely on my work, not my family's scandal. I bought a small house near the foothills, learned to ski despite my back limitations, and adopted a rescue dog who'd also survived trauma. Dating felt impossible at first. How do you explain that your brother tried to kill you, that your parents chose him over you, that your family name is synonymous with crime in certain circles? But eventually, I met Marcus at a climbing gym where we both did adaptive climbing for people with physical limitations. He'd lost his leg in Afghanistan, understood PTSD, and recovery never judged my story. We took things slow, both of us carrying damage that required careful handling. He proposed on the anniversary of my first 10K, at the same finish line where I'd sobbed in my colleague's arms. He said he wanted to mark the place where I'd proved that nothing could keep me down. We married in a small ceremony in the mountains, surrounded by chosen family, the people who'd stood by me when blood relatives failed. Sarah was my maid of honor, now divorced and thriving, working as an advocate for domestic violence survivors. Dr. Coleman walked me down the aisle, having become the father figure I'd never had. My nursing colleagues filled the guest list, along with new friends who knew me as Victoria the survivor, not Victoria the victim. We started a foundation together, Marcus and I supporting survivors of family violence. We focused on cases where privilege protected perpetrators, where victims faced disbelief because their families seemed perfect. The first year we helped 12 people escape abusive situations. By year 3, we'd expanded to include legal aid therapy support and emergency housing. Jake wrote me a letter from prison on the 5th anniversary of his conviction. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. Inside, he'd written 10 pages of blame, still insisting I'd destroyed his life, that I'd misunderstood playful sibling rivalry, that I'd turned our parents against him. No accountability, no recognition of harm, no change. I burned the letter and scattered the ashes in my garden where they could at least fertilize something beautiful. Dad died in prison 3 years into his sentence. Heart attack during a workout. The ultimate irony for someone who'd prided himself on physical superiority. Mom called me for the first time in years, wanting me to pay for his funeral. I declined and hung up. She held a service anyway, apparently attended by 6 people. The empire he'd built was gone. The legacy he'd wanted disappeared into criminal records and cautionary tales. Mom still lives with her sister, from what I hear through mutual acquaintances. She tells people she has no children, that both her kids died in different ways. In a sense, she's right. The daughter who desperately sought her approval, who stayed quiet to keep peace, who protected family secrets, that girl did die. What emerged from the wreckage was someone stronger, someone who refuses to let anyone else define her worth. 10 years have passed since Jake pushed me off that balcony. A decade of healing growth and transformation that I never could have imagined while lying paralyzed in that pool. This morning I watched my 5-year-old daughter take her first ski lesson on the bunny slope, her fearlessness making my heart simultaneously soar and clench. Marcus stood beside me, our 2-year-old son asleep in his carrier, safe and loved and protected in ways I never was. My back still aches when storms come through the titanium hardware, a permanent weather predictor. I still attend physical therapy monthly, maintaining the mobility I fought so hard to regain. Some mornings the first steps are difficult, my body remembering trauma even when my mind has moved forward. But I've learned to honor these reminders, to thank my body for surviving and adapting. The pediatric trauma unit I now run at Children's Hospital Colorado has become a model for recognizing and addressing child abuse. We've implemented protocols I developed from my own experienced training staff to look beyond surface presentations, to question prominent families just as thoroughly as any others. Last year alone, we identified and helped remove 43 children from abusive situations. Each one feels like a small victory against the system that failed me. I still speak at conferences, though. Now I focus more on resilience than trauma. I talk about post-traumatic growth, how surviving attempted murder by a family member forced me to rebuild my entire understanding of self-safety and love. I share photos from my marathons, my wedding, my children, playing evidence that life after family violence can be more than just survival. The foundation Marcus and I started has grown beyond our wildest dreams. We have chapters in 12 states, full-time staff, and partnerships with major hospitals. We've helped over 300 people escape abusive families, particularly those from privileged backgrounds, where money and reputation create additional barriers to freedom. Sarah runs our Texas chapter, fierce and unstoppable in her advocacy. Sometimes reporters still call, wanting to revisit the scandal of the Anderson family collapse. They're particularly interested now that Jake is approaching potential parole hearings, though his additional federal sentences mean he won't actually be free for decades. I decline all interviews about the past, preferring to focus on the future we're building. Dr. Coleman, now retired, visits us every Christmas. He's become the grandfather my children deserve, teaching them chess and telling stories that have nothing to do with our dark history. He once told me that in 40 years of medicine, saving me was what he was proudest of. Not the medical intervention, but the moral courage to call for help against my father's wishes. I got a message from Melissa last month, Jake's college girlfriend who fell down those stairs. She'd just completed her doctorate in psychology, specializing in trauma recovery. She thanked me for being the first person to publicly stand up to him for breaking the silence that had trapped so many of us. We video chat occasionally, a small network of survivors who understand each other in ways no one else can. The thing about recovery from family violence is that it's not linear. There are days when I wake up feeling invincible, ready to conquer mountains literally and figuratively. Other days, a certain tone of voice or unexpected movement makes me flinch, my body remembering danger my mind has processed. I've learned to be patient with myself on those harder days, to treat my triggers with compassion rather than frustration. My children know an age-appropriate version of why we don't see my birth family. They understand that some people who are supposed to love you choose to hurt you instead, and that it's okay to stay away from those people. They've never met their biological grandparents or uncle, and they never will. Instead, they're surrounded by chosen family who celebrate their achievements, comfort their fears, and love them unconditionally. Teaching my daughter to be strong without being silent has become my greatest challenge and joy. When she tells me about playground conflicts, I listen and believe her. When she says someone hurt her, I investigate. When she stands up for herself, I celebrate her courage. She'll never wonder if she matters less than someone else in our family. She'll never stay quiet to keep an artificial peace. The irony isn't lost on me that I became everything my birth family claimed to value. Successful, respected, financially comfortable, with a beautiful family and genuine accomplishments. But I achieved it by rejecting everything they actually stood for: silence over truth, appearance over authenticity, power over justice. Their definition of success required victims. Mine requires healing. I think about Jake sometimes rotting in federal prison, holding on to his version of events where he's the victim. I wonder if he ever has moments of clarity, if he ever truly understands what he threw away. He had everything handed to him, every advantage, every opportunity, and he chose violence and greed. I had everything taken from me, including the use of my legs, and I chose to rebuild and thrive. Mom sent a letter through a lawyer 2 years ago asking if she could meet her grandchildren. The audacity still takes my breath away. The woman who accused me of ruining a party while I lay paralyzed wanted access to my children. My lawyer's response was brief and final. No contact ever under any circumstances. The restraining order ensures she can't try again. People sometimes ask if I forgive my family. It's a complicated question that assumes forgiveness is the end goal of healing. I've released the anger that was poisoning my recovery, but forgiveness implies a reconciliation that would require accountability they've never shown. I've made peace with the fact that the family I deserved never existed. The parents and brother I mourned were fantasies I created to survive childhood. What I've learned through this decade of recovery is that surviving isn't the same as living. For years, I survived my family's abuse, adapted to their cruelty, minimized my pain to maintain their comfort. But surviving keeps you trapped in reaction to trauma. Living means creating something new entirely, building a life where the trauma becomes context, not content. My story isn't unique, though its details might be extreme. Every day, someone is being hurt by the people who should protect them. Every day, someone is being told their pain doesn't matter, that family reputation matters more than their safety. Every day, someone believes they have to endure abuse because blood is thicker than water. But here's what I know now, standing on my own legs, that medicine said might never work again. Blood means nothing if it comes with violence. Family isn't defined by DNA, but by consistent love and protection. And sometimes the most radical act of self-love is walking away from people who would rather see you dead than free. The view from my Colorado home shows mountains that seemed impossibly tall when I first moved here. Now I've climbed several of them slowly and carefully, but successfully. Each summit reminds me that impossible is just a starting point, not a destination. My children will grow up believing mountains are meant to be climbed, that falling doesn't mean failing, that getting back up is what defines us. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you're lying in your own metaphorical pool, paralyzed by family violence and disbelief, know this: survival is possible, recovery is achievable, and thriving is your right. It might take surgery, literally or figuratively, to repair the damage. It might take years of therapy to reclaim your voice. It might cost you everything you thought mattered. But on the other side of that loss is freedom. Freedom to define yourself, to choose your family, to live without fear. Freedom to raise children who never question their worth. freedom to love and be loved without violence, freedom to tell your story without shame. That's the real tragedy of what Jake did. Not that he pushed me off a balcony, but that he gave me the gift of rock bottom. Because when you've lost everything, including the use of your legs, and survived it, you realize you're capable of anything. He thought he was destroying me. Instead, he freed me from a family that was slowly killing me anyway. 10 years ago, I lay motionless in a pool while my father yelled at me to stop being a baby. Today, I stand tall, surrounded by love-living proof that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's healing so completely that those who hurt you become footnotes in a story of triumph. They wanted me silent and still. Instead, I became loud and unstoppable. That's the ending they never saw coming. Looking back, that paramedic Jennifer was the first person in authority who truly saw what was happening. She looked past the big house, the important guests, the powerful family, and saw a young woman who needed help. She didn't just save my spine that day. She saved my life by believing what she saw over what she was told. One person choosing truth over comfort can change everything. My physical therapist recently asked what motivated me through the hardest days of recovery. The answer was complex, but simple. Every step I took was a declaration that I deserved to exist. Every milestone was proof that their version of my worth was wrong. Every achievement was evidence that the real waste was how they'd treated a daughter who would have loved them completely if they'd just protected her once. Now, when I watch my daughter play fearless and free, I see the childhood I should have had. When my son reaches for me, trusting completely that I'll catch him, I understand what family should be. When Marcus looks at me with pride instead of judgment, I know what love actually means. This life built on the ruins of the old one is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined while trying to earn my birth family's approval. The scar across my lower back is significant, a daily reminder of how close I came to never walking again. But scars are just evidence of survival proof that we're stronger than what tried to break us. My children have asked about it, and I tell them it's where I grew wings and learned to fly. It's not entirely a metaphor. Falling taught me that I could survive impact. Recovery taught me I could rise. So that's my story. From paralysis to marathons, from silence to advocacy, from victim to survivor to thriver. Jake remains in prison, Dad died behind bars, and Mom lives in the shadow of her choices. But I live in sunshine, surrounded by people who celebrate my victories and support me through challenges. If you're watching this and seeing parallels to your own life, if you recognize the patterns of family violence in your own story, please know that help exists. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, RAIN, local crisis centers, they're all waiting to believe you support, you help you escape. You don't have to fall off a balcony to deserve freedom from abuse. You just have to decide that you matter more than their reputation. Thank you for listening to my story. What family dynamics have you had to overcome? How did you find the strength to break free from toxic patterns? Please share in the comments below your story. Might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to help these important conversations reach more people who need them. And please share this video with anyone who might be struggling with family violence. Sometimes seeing someone else survive is the first step toward believing you can too. Remember, you are not alone. You are believed and you deserve safety and love. Take care of yourselves and each other.